Rogue Planet by Brent Spivey, not to be confused with Rogue Stars by Andreas Filigoy. Rogue Planet is an independent rule set. It's fairly light as these things go, and I have been meaning to get a game of this on the table for quite some time, but I just keep putting it off, and there's a couple of different reasons for that. Today we're going to do a review of this game. It's a fine game, and I think there's a very good chance you might enjoy this game. After watching today's video, you might poke around the YouTubes. There's a couple of other channels that have done some live plays or actual plays of this game, and you can get an even better feel for how it works in practice. Now, as I said, this is, of course, you can tell from the artwork, it's a space fantasy game. This is the kind of game where you will hear people say things like, "Drive me closer, I want to hit them with my sword," which is fine. That's the vibe that it's got going for it. The art is nice. There are two versions of this game. There is the nice and easy peasy 24-page kind of booklet version of the game, and then there is a really sexy hardback, full-color art, gorgeous-looking version of this game. If after seeing this video you think you want to buy a copy, I recommend, if you think you're going to be putting this on the table with any regularity, go ahead and buy the pretty one. It just looks fantastic. It looks a little something like this right here. So with all of that out of the way, let's go ahead and take a look at the game. And I'll warn you right up front, it's a squad level, meaning you're going to have a small handful of guys. Both sides are. And it's very, very innovative, perhaps to a fault. Your figures are going to have very simple profiles. The only stats you really have to worry about are, and I'm going to do that annoying thing where you use the book itself as your notes. Your stats are going to be, your profile is simply, basically, it's melee, ranged attack, your defensive score, and armor rating. Now, those are the four stats that you actually put numbers to. The system itself is a skill check system. You roll 2d6 for the most part, and you're looking to beat a target number of, there are a couple of different successes. You can have a total success with a result of a 10-up, a partial success with a result of a 7-up, or a failure on the result of a, well, less than a 7. So, as I said, this is an innovative rule set. That's the basic gist of it. 5 stats with some traits. It's skill-based, 2d6 for the most part. But there are a number of innovations, and I'm going to break out a couple of figures that I have handy here. There's one, there's two. And the first innovative practice, and we're doing Red Hat versus Space Ghost, which you have probably seen in a recent Fistful of Lead video. It's what I have handy. First thing to be aware of is that movement and firing are anywhere you want to go within line of sight. In other words, if I want to move this guy in an action, he's going to move up to there. If I want to get him around here, now because it's straight line, that's one action, and then moving all the way over here is one action. That's a bit odd, right? Whereas if this guy wants to move through the rough terrain as represented by the book, he can only move, well, he can move into the terrain, but he can't move to contact anyone, and he has to stop before leaving the terrain. A linear obstacle, likewise. If he hits that linear obstacle, he has to stop. And then on the next turn, he can move over the linear obstacle as far as he wants within line of sight. The activation is very simple. For every figure that you've got, you're going to have one action point. But there is an action-reaction sequence that you have to be aware of. And this is where the game starts to get even more innovative. Suppose I've got a guy that wants to move to, you deal with initiative. You're going to have a number of action points. I'm sorry, you roll a d6 to figure out how many action points you have, or you can just take 3. So that's part of it. Whoever has the most action points is going to have the initiative this turn. I want to spend an action point to move this feller over to here. Well, as I'm moving, or maybe I declare I'm going to move him over to here. So I declare I'm going to move this guy from here to here. That costs me 1 action point. I take that point out of my pool. He says, great, I'm going to shoot your dude as soon as he appears. So now we get to do this. He spends an action point. He does his shot. And then whatever the results are, assuming Red Hat survives, now he gets to take an action. So he says, well, I want to move to contact. He spends his action point. And Red Hat says, well, I want to countercharge. Okay, great. Then what we're going to do is we're going to find that middle point, and we move to contact, and that's going to be a charge and a countercharge. So we've both spent 4 action points. there is a lot of opportunities for, or alternatively, the ghost could react by, well, I'm going to wait and I'm going to fire at this guy. Range bands don't really matter, so for the most part. So, I'll wait until he's right there, and then I'll take my shot, and then assuming Mr. Red Hat survives, bang, he is going to run into my guy. Now, melee actions, if I attack in melee, that costs an action point. So when you charge, you wind up in contact. You don't roll a melee attack. Remember, we're dealing with the space fantasy vibe. We're looking at more Saturday morning cartoons. Your He-Mans, well, let's take a look at who Brent's inspirations are. I'm thinking there's some pretty good looking art in there, right? Final Fantasy 7 and 8, whatever that means. Gamma World, Spelljam, Star Ocean, Destiny, what? I don't know what half those things are. Mass Effect. It feels more cartoony, right? Because when you move into contact, you're going to have a collision, and you're going to roll some dice to see if you do some knockback with these guys. And there's all kinds of ways that you can influence your opponent. You might throw him somehow. And here's where we get to one of the things that people complain about with this game that I don't feel is a valid complaint, and that is the effects distance. In the rules as listed, the effects distance is this far. 1, 2, 3 fingers. People online tend to complain about that. You don't have to measure anything, but when you do, you use your fingers. Well, listen, I have the hands of a 10-year-old girl, and so 3 fingers for me is not very far. But my friend has big fat sausage fingers, which for him are this far. It's way further. What to do? Guys, settle down, figure it out. You either say, look, I'm going to use 4 fingers to make it even. Okay, you know what we're going to do? We're going to break out a playing card, and it's going to be the width of a playing card. I've thrown your guy. I can throw him up to that far. Maybe you decide we're going to go a little longer on our effects distance. Maybe you break out the rulers and say the effects distance is 2 inches. It ain't rocket science. Figure it out. But that is a little bit odd that the only real measuring you're going to do is that effects distance. And get used to hearing that, because that is a little odd, comes up over and over again. And that's really my complaint with this game. There is such a thing as too much innovation. At a certain point, every aspect of this game has a new and unusual way of doing things, and it just gets to be a little bit too much for me. So let's talk about some of the other ways that it's unusual. Combat is very simple. You compare your close combat skills if we're in melee. And so let's suppose that our melee boy, here's our ghost pirate, is attacking Mr. Red Hat. Our melee guy has a higher melee rating, so he's making his attack, and his rating is 2 higher. He gets a +2 on his attack, meaning that his partial success will occur on a 5 and total success on an 8. Very simple. You make your roll, and on a partial success, now depending on whether you're attacking somebody who is a light, medium, or heavy unit, you will do on a partial success. If it's a light unit, you will only ever do, on a light unit, you will do the difference between the combat skills. Remember I said our difference is 2? Any success, you do 2 points of damage. What does that mean? Well, okay, so to understand that, we have to talk about a thing called energy. And energy is a thing that comes about, you get 1 energy for every model on the table. If any of your boys, well, it's 1 for every light, 2 for every medium, and 3 for every big hulking bruiser that you have on the table. You might get bonus energy if you have power armor or a power fist. I hit my boy and do 2 damage. I can take that energy, goes into a pool. I can take those 2 energy away, and he continues to fight. Once you're out of energy, any wounding hit will remove a figure. Oh, except for a thing called pawns. We'll circle back around to that in a moment. That's how energy works. It's essentially a get-out-of-jail-free card. It is a save card, a save state. I've got 5 light troops. I've got 5 energy. My first 5 hits on any of my troops, I can choose to negate that damage. Now, remember, against light troops, any hit is going to do a partial success will do a light hit. A full success will do the difference between your close combat scores. Against a big honkin' bruiser, every hit only does 1 damage. And then in the case of a medium unit, partial success will do 1 point of damage, and a total success will do the difference between your scores. So that's kind of how the combat works. Likewise with shooting, I'm going to shoot at you, and the amount of damage I'm doing is, maybe it's affected by, a guy with a sword does 1 extra damage regardless of the difference, or not. Okay, so that's the game in a nutshell. You've got the oddity of, you can move as far as you want to go. Your close combat or your shooting is a simple skill check. with, you know, maybe some various modifiers. Hey, red guy is up a little bit higher. He's going to get an extra +1 to his check. All right, you know, that's all well and good. And there's not a whole lot of modifiers, not a lot to track there. And then when you hit, you got the energy, which is an energy pool that everybody uses. And oh boy. Okay, now we got to talk about this thing called the rogue die. Certain abilities will give you an opportunity to roll a third die that is a different color. So for example, now we're going to pretend that these are D6s because I don't have them handy. I will roll my 2D6 and then I'm going to roll a rogue die because I'm punching you with my power fist. What the heck? I went ahead and grabbed my D6s. So I'm going to make my skill check with the power fist. And if my rogue die matches one of the 2D6, then the extra ability kicks in. Or perhaps I am attacking a ghost who has a rogue die that says, if the rogue die comes up equal to either of my attack rolls, regardless of how effective I am hitting Mr. Ghost, he's ethereal, rogue die matches the 4, the hit does no effect. See? Now you've got another fun little system that you can use to influence, because we don't have enough of those already. Let's talk about how leaders work in Rogue Planet. Leaders have special abilities, as you might imagine. They have the ability to, and we're going to put some more helpers down, like so. Here's our leader down here, and we've got a helper up here, and we've got a helper down here. Leaders can issue orders to their buddies, the buddies that they can see. So that's important. I don't have line of sight to this guy because let's say the book is a building. That means that I can't give an order to him. Oh, that's a problem. Unless we have this fun little thing called pawns. And pawns, depending on how big the battle are extra figures that you give to your leader, and they give your leader extra abilities. If you have an ammo carrier, your leader, when he uses an action point to fire at an enemy, he can make 2 attacks instead of just 1. Or maybe your pawn has a radio, so now the leader can issue orders to people anywhere on the board. He does not have to see him. Maybe your pawn is just rather large and in charge, so he gives your leader a +2 on his armor check. There's all kinds of abilities that he can use. We get into a fight, and my boy takes a hit. Now, instead of removing an energy, or perhaps we're out of energy, our leader can remove a pawn. Now, removing that pawn saves the leader, but now he loses that special ability that was granted by the pawn. A classic, for those of you that play G-Dubs games, the classic example of that would be, say, a war boss who has a couple of grots around him. One of them's got a wrench, one of them's got a radio, and one of them's got, you know, a big heavy shell. So that is a special ability that gets attrited. You know, it's in this battle of attrition, he's losing his special abilities at his choice until finally he's down to no energy and no pawns, and now one last hit will knock him out of the game. Again, going back to the Power Fist, if our Rogue die matches the special ability for Power Fists, if they're wielded by a bruiser, I can grab this guy and I can chuck him 3 inches. He runs into a collision. Remember we talked about collisions before? When you charge into melee with the guy, depending on how big you are, what you're going to do is you are going to roll, and here it is right here. A medium unit will roll a d6, all right? And then if you roll that d6, you do a roll off, and whoever has the, well, wait a minute. When you charge an enemy, you will roll 2. So we get 2 medium guys, Mr. Ghost, charging Mr. Red Hat. So Mr. Ghost is going to get to roll 2 dice 6, and Mr. Red Hat is going to roll 1. The 2d6 we keep the highest, and oh, look at that. Because he rolled 2 dice, Mr. Red Hat won that collision, and he's going to be able to shove this guy. I think he does 2 damage because of the collision. Now, if these were both light, you would be rolling a d4 versus a d6, and a big honkin' bruiser rolls a d8 versus, and you know, so big honkin' bruiser, if he's a big boy and he charges, he's going to be rolling 2d8 versus, do I have a couple of d8s? I do, against our d6. Much more likely to succeed. The difference is going to be bigger, and that's going to lead to additional damage. Now remember we talked about the charge countercharge, so if our bruiser charges and he spends the point to countercharge, well now we're going to be rolling 2d8 versus 2d6, and that extra action point may be all the difference in the world. Well, hey, it is in this case, because we got a 6, we matched a 6, and so what does that mean? We can take a look at this on our collision check. If both numbers are the same, then no damage is done and no units are staggered. Staggered is another concept that's basically, hey, you know, you're going to have to spend points to stand up, that kind of thing. So there you go. We have a very light melee weapons. I count like maybe a half a dozen of them. We have just a few power melee weapons. Missile weapons aren't that. I mean, it's just everything black powder. Fantasy, blasters, carbines, flamers, right? Very simple. There's only about a dozen of those examples. And then, of course, we have to talk about, you know, there are other enhancements. They do have rules for sorcerers and psychics. You can purchase points. Your guys that are able to force people can buy a spell that lets them shove an effects distance. Hey, I just shoved you into the lava, even though I had the high ground. We do have heroes who only ever take 1 point of damage, and then we do have a couple of different scenarios. You know, these 1, 2, 3, 4 scenarios, and a real. I don't even think we have a campaign system, do we? Extended ops. You can play a series of linked games based on Lost in Force. They're very limited, kind of. And as I flip through this, I think I showed you the artwork, black and white. It's, you know, this guy's obviously, he's got one arm roided out. I don't know what's going on there. Maybe it's just foreshadowing. Well, little tick marks there. But, you know, the art's nice and serviceable. Like I said, this one is just, there's a termite-looking guy right there, right? Mr. Termy. He looks a little familiar. So, you know, 24 pages. I think this one is like 10 to 12 bucks to print on demand. A couple little questions. It's an engaging read. It's a fairly light game. You're going to be looking at 3 to 6 figures each. You can use, obviously, it is setting neutral. You create your own setting. You can use any figures with this game. Here's a secret they don't want you to know. You can use any figures with any game. But this one is specifically designed for a very cartoony move, counter move, flinging guys around. And there are rules in here for throwable terrain. If you have cars, you can declare that any large figure can throw a car. Maybe up to an effects distance that has some power. Destructible terrain. If you have light posts, they can get knocked over. So there's a lot of fun little stuff in here. But fundamentally, at the end of the day, when playing this game, it really is a bridge too far in my taste. One of the reasons this isn't part of my regular rotation, is that it doesn't have that solid, familiar framework that branches off in one, maybe two strange and unfamiliar ways. It doesn't really evoke a flavor that's just a little bit different from the everyday. So what winds up happening, and very much I get the feeling when I play this, the same feeling as when I play Tomorrow's War. Because there's so many novel concepts all going on at once, I always feel like I'm missing something. I always feel like there's something in the game that I'm just not getting my arms around, or that I'm not doing properly, because it's just a little bit too innovative. However, you may want to pick up a copy of this even if you don't play the game, because there are a lot of really interesting ideas that I think would scale well with other games. Here at the channel, we're big fans of Kablam, Fistful of Lead. Solo rules. You could very easily implement pawns in Kablam, Fistful of Lead. You could give your figure 3 little pawns that give him power-ups, 3 extra traits. And the pawns, by the way, I don't know if I mentioned this, they're not actual figures. They just kind of tag along with your guy. Wherever he goes, they go. They don't provide cover. They don't provide, I think one of them might provide line of sight, so you can expand your line of sight. One of the special abilities, you can shoot from this guy. But generally speaking, enemies have to contact or shoot at your figure. And then these are just, they're kind of like, you know, tokens that you might put on. You could even do that. You could put them on the character sheet as tokens on whatever the power is, and then just take the tokens off to mark that I no longer have that power. But it's a lot more fun and a lot more interesting to include them on the table. They add that little bit of flavor, and it is fun. So there's a lot of, the point being, got a little off track there, as one does. The point being, there are a lot of little ideas in here that are very stealable and very useful in other games that you play. Not a bad rule set, just a little bit too much for me. I recommend you pick up a copy of it. Hey, if you're a collector, if you're the kind of guy that likes to read rule sets, see how different rules are presented, then, you know, give it a look. The setup, again, one of the difficulties is you have to read the whole thing several times, because all of these weird, innovative ideas intersect and interlock very intimately, and you can't be introduced to all of them at the same time. So Brent introduces one and says, "By the way, we'll come back to it," and then and that's part of why this review is so hard. And then he talks about another, and he says, "This is how it interacts with this, but remember that this innovation also interacts with the thing you haven't seen yet. When we get to that thing, we'll talk about how it." So you have to understand the whole thing. It's a very tight rule set. It works reasonably well together, but again, just a little bit too much for my taste. Give me something a little more streamlined, particularly as a solo wargamer primarily. I'm not too interested in that much move, counter move, act, counteract, and remembering whose turn it is and who did the thing and who did the what. So, not particularly my taste, although I've enjoyed it. It's not part of my regular rotation, but I think you should give Rogue Planet a look. It's just different enough to keep you interested, even if it's too different enough for my taste. Until next time, I'm praying for you.